بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أتمان الأكملان خير خلق الله أجمعين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Dearest brothers and sisters, and welcome to this continuation of the Tafseer of Surah Yusuf alayhi salam. This is now the 14th lesson. We will be covering inshallah verses 30, what do we have here? 41, 42 and 43 inshallah. Just to get you up to speed where we are, we've reached the stage in the life of Yusuf alayhi salam where he's now in prison. He's a prisoner in the land of Egypt, and he meets two prisoners that are also there with him. And Allah Jalla wa Ala then tells us that what happened was that the two prisoners had a dream each. They came to Yusuf alayhi salam, they saw some good in him, they said, we see you from the muhsineen, and they asked him to interpret the dream. Yusuf alayhi salam took that opportunity with both hands to first give them da'wah. Why? Because the people of Egypt were mushrikun, including these two as well. And so that was a very amazing piece of da'wah that he did. We dissected it, we analyzed it, and we drew some conclusions as well as to what we learn about da'wah in our times through the da'wah of Yusuf alayhi salam. This next part is now the interpretation of the two dreams. Okay? Now, we've had the one dream in the beginning. That's the dream of Yusuf alayhi salam. Okay? Now, this is now the second and third dream. There's going to be one more dream coming, yeah? That's the dream of the king of Egypt. So this is dream number 2 and 3. Okay, let's recite these parts inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا صاحبي السجن أما أحدكما فيسقي ربه خمرا وأما الآخر فيصلب فتأكل الطير من رأسه قضي الأمر الذي فيه تستفتيان وقال للذي ظن أنه ناج منهما اذكرني عند ربك فأنساه الشيطان ذكر ربه فلبث في السجن بضع سنين وقال الملك إني أرى 7 بقرات سمان يأكلهن 7 عجاف و7 سنبلات خضر وأخر يابسات يا أيها الملأ أفتوني في رؤياي إن كنتم للرؤيا تعبرون قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal-mursaleen, nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. You have to appreciate how excited these two prisoners were to be sitting before Yusuf alayhi salam, because they've had dreams which may signify their freedom, okay, their release from prison. Then they've told him, and he's told them that I can for sure interpret your dreams, no problem whatsoever. Before the ta'am comes, khalas, you'll know exactly what it means. So they're sitting there patiently, very excited to find out the dream interpretation. Now, there's two dreams. First person has a dream that he is a'asiru khamra. He's pressing grapes to make wine. Second person has a dream, he's got bread on top of his head, and what? Birds are coming and they're pecking on the bread. So you can kind of sense there's a good news and there's bad news. Right? There's good news and bad news. One guy, he's going to make it big. He's going to be pressing wine. What does that mean? Whatever it means, it's not a bad thing. The other guy, birds pecking on top of my head. That sounds bad. So what's interesting is Yusuf alayhi salam, which dream does he interpret first? Yeah, good one or bad one? Ya sahibi sijn. He begins again, oh my prison buddies. Okay, nice, friendly, warm conversation. Ya sahibi sijn. Amma ahadukuma. As for the first, okay, so he's going to go for the good news. He's like, you want good news or bad news? And there's like, good news. Okay, no problem. Amma ahadukuma. The first of you, then fayasqi rabbahu khamra. You're going to be quenching the thirst of your master with wine. Now you see, yasqi, okay, means to give drink to somebody else. Okay, so what kind of person gives drink to somebody else? What kind of job is that? Huh? A waiter, but what's a full-time waiter called? Butler. And who's a butler going to be a butler to? Just an ordinary person? Very good. So someone who's up in the elite, someone who can afford a butler. I mean, come on, you can afford a butler. It means you must be one of the very rich people around here. So he's thinking, he's being told, you're going to get free, number one. Then you're going to land a really good job. That job is going to be working for someone who's one of the elite. Okay? فَيَسْقِي رَبَّهُ خَمْرًا. Okay, so look, this guy's happy now. Alhamdulillah, oh, fantastic. Okay, now bad news. Okay. أَمَّا الْآخَرِ. As for the last of you, the second of you, فَيُصْلَبُ فَتَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْ رَأْسِهِ. It's not good. The other of you will be yuslab, will be crucified. Yeah, and birds will be eating your head. Will be eating your head. So basically, like vultures come to a carcass and start eating from it, he's being told that you're gonna get out maybe too as well, but you're gonna die basically. And it's not gonna be good. It's gonna be birds coming and eating at your rotten body. So what's the reaction gonna be of the second guy? What's his reaction going to be? So he just comes, this guy is this, he looks like a very noble person. Please tell me the ta'wil of my dream. What's it going to be? I'm so excited. And he says, yeah, the thing is, you're actually going to die, and there's going to be birds, and they're going to be eating your body. What's his reaction going to be? He's going to be what? Exactly. He's going to, I don't believe you. Look what Yusuf alayhi salam says next. قُضِيَ الْأَمْرِ. The matter already been decreed. It's been decreed. قُضِيَ الْأَمْرِ means it's being decreed. Meaning, I know you're not going to accept it, or you think I'm maybe making it up. I'm not. قُضِيَ الْأَمْرِ. It's being decreed, meaning by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no way out of this. This is the dream interpretation for sure. So he's like, oh man, still don't believe you. الَّذِي فِيهِ تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ. This is the dream interpretation already been decreed for those that were seeking the tastaftiyan, means seeking the fatwa. Yeah, so the dream interpretation has been related to us in many ways. It's been referred to as the ta'wil, which means interpretation. And now another word, actually before that it was in ba, give us nabbi'na bi ta'wili. Give us the interpretation. There's another word here coming now, which is ifta. Give us the fatwa. But fatwa is being used here in the sense of dream interpretation. That's another word to use as well. Interesting, some scholars said that, linguists rather, said that when the dream interpretation gets harder, different words are being used to show that it's actually a harder dream to interpret. And it's quite interesting, when you get to the next dream of the king, that's even more harder to interpret. And that's why the king says to his people, Aftuni fi ru'ya. Give me the fatwa of this dream, not the ta'wil. They said ta'wil is used for dreams which are fairly easy to interpret. And the thing is, it's very interesting because the first dream of Yusuf, 11 stars and planets, sun and the moon bang down to him. The interpretation is quite easy, isn't it? You can kind of work it out. Okay, so he's got 11 brothers, mum and dad. Yeah, I think I'll see where this is going. Yeah, that's ta'wil. But this one a little bit more difficult, yeah? Fihi tastaftiyan. This is the fatwa you guys were seeking, both of you. And then the king also makes it very clear, this is a fatwa that I need for my dream. Okay, it's no ordinary easy dream, it's very difficult. Okay, now قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ الَّذِي فِيهِ تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ. Yusuf alayhi salam just adding that, Ibn Ashur says for tahqiq, which means to say for sure this is the interpretation. I'm not making this up, there's no way this could be wrong. Allah has taught me dream interpretation, this is for sure the dream. Okay, now what happens? قَالَ لِلَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ مِّنْهُمَا أُذْكُرْنِي عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ. Now Yusuf alayhi salam says to the one الَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ, to the one that he, now somebody may think the meaning of dhann is to think or to assume. This word dhann actually has two opposite meanings. Sometimes it's used to mean to think this is going to happen, yeah, like Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah Al-Hujurat, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, ijtanibu kathiran min ad-dhann. Stay well away from having bad assumptions about people. That's being used in the sense of thinking or assuming, not knowing for sure. We can use it in the opposite way, to mean know for sure. And that's the meaning here. So Yusuf Islam says to the one that he knows for sure is going to get out and then go and work for someone very, very senior. What does he say? Udhkurni inda rabbik. Make dhikr of me to your Rabb. Meaning your boss, your master. Now the word Rabb, obviously we use it regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's a Rabb. So how is it being used for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said that in the Sharia from before, it was permissible to refer to your Sayyid, your master, as Rabb. In our Sharia, that is prohibited. Just like sajda, out of respect, ihtiram, for others was permitted in their Sharia, and it was abrogated in our Sharia. No one can do sajda to another person, as is part of our culture, out of respect, even for the parents. It's haram. So again, Rabb, it was being used then like this. So Yusuf alayhi salam, he's saying, make mention of me to your master. And what does he mean by that? What he means by that is, look, I'm languishing in prison. Your master, Ibn Ashur, he says, he's referring to the king himself. Okay, the king. Because he's going to go and work for someone senior. That person may well be just under the king, someone close to the king. So when he says, make mention of me to your master, he means the king himself. He's saying that take my plight, the injustice that's done to me, and relate that onto the king. Okay, so that justice will be served. However, there's another interpretation. The other interpretation is "Udhkurni inda rabbik." Okay, that is the interpretation. Make mention of me to your master. The next part is فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّي. And then shaitan made him forget the dhikr of his Rabb. So following on from the first interpretation, which is go and tell your boss about my plight. The second part is shaitan made that ex-prisoner forget to do that thing, which was to make dhikr to his Rabb. Okay, is that clear? He gave him a task, go and tell the king, okay, about me stuck in prison for no good reason. فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّي. And shaitan got the better of him, made him forget. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. And so as a result of him forgetting, he languished alayhi salam in prison for another بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. بِضْعَ means a number between 3 and 9. Okay, some scholars said 7 years basically. He ended up staying another 7 years in prison because this guy forgot what he's supposed to do. Big mistake. Okay, the other interpretation is what? فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانِ. This dhamir, the pronoun in فَأَنْسَا, goes back to who? Anyone following? Yusuf alayhi salam. Shaitan made Yusuf alayhi salam forget about the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He done something wrong. What does that mean? It means that he shouldn't have said that to that guy. He should have just relied on Allah. Yeah? It was a momentary lapse in making dhikr of Allah, meaning that he fell short in having tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of that, Allah Jalla wa Ala said, فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ. Kind of like a punishment. Allah then made him stay in prison for longer than what he could have had stayed. Do you get that interpretation? That's the second interpretation. We'll come back to this now, because Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has a very strong, if you like, refutation of this second opinion, which is that absolutely not. This is a misinterpretation of the verse. It is not correct to say that Yusuf alayhi salam made a mistake and should have had tawakkul in Allah, and that was the reason why he stayed in prison for longer than he was supposed to. We'll come back to that. But anyway, just hold that in your mind. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he says something quite amazing. He says that, look here, Yusuf alayhi salam, he thinks, I've got a chance to get out of prison. Okay, king finds out, he'll realize what's going on. I'll get out of prison, alhamdulillah, and that's the end of this horrible situation. But it just so happens that the person who held that key to his freedom forgot. Okay, forgot. And so he stays in prison for another 7 years. But the thing is, what happens is actually good. Because if he did get out of prison, how would his life turn out? If he got out of prison at that stage, how would his life turn out? Would he end up meeting his family? Would he become the Aziz? Maybe not. Because the way he becomes Aziz is, he's still in prison, king has a dream, he finds out the interpretation, king recognizes him, king makes him Aziz, Aziz is now in control of the state treasury, then the family comes, and everything else is based on this interpretation of the king's dream. So if he managed to get out of prison at that time, who knows what would have happened? So Ibn Kathir rahimahullah is saying this is, Allah is teaching us about a previous lesson. Wallahu ghalibun ala amrihi. Allah is in total control of the affair. Allah intended and wanted that to happen to him for a greater purpose. And that's very clear when you look at the whole story, that he ended up staying in prison even though he could have gotten out. Oh yeah, but then the king has a dream, isn't it? Oh, and then he interprets the dream, and then look what happens to him. Yeah. So everything, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in total control. The other point my Shaykh made, actually, Shaykh Haytham, hafidhahullah, he said, look here, subhanallah, the way Allah, speaks about the extra part, that the extra sentence he serves in prison, in a very ambiguous way. He says, فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. He stayed in prison for بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. How much exactly? I mean, is it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? I mean, there's a big difference between 3 years and 9 years, right? It's like, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. And so my Shaykh said, this shows us that Allah Jalla wa Ala really, He intends to test us. And the testing in our life shouldn't really be that big a deal to us. Once we realize that Allah wants to test us, and we are responding to the test in the best possible way, it doesn't really matter how bad the test is. The test is serving a purpose. If it's 3 years, 5 years, 9 years, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that Allah is testing me. Yeah, and I need to respond in the best way possible. And testing is part of life, up and down. Things go up and down. Something happened today is good, tomorrow bad. The day after maybe even worse. Khalas. Don't be so overwhelmed by calamities. Look at the way Allah just spoke about Yusuf. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ. It's like, so he ended up staying in prison a lot longer than he was supposed to. That's what happened. Yeah. طيب. Next verse. وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ إِنِّي أَرَى سَبْعَ بَقَرَاتٍ سِمَانٍ يَأْكُلُهُنَّ سَبْعٌ عِجَافٍ. Now the king, a new character being introduced into the story, the king of Egypt. Okay, the king of Egypt. Here a very interesting point Ibn Ashur makes. Ibn Ashur rahimahullah, they would call him, what we would call him, a polymath. A polymath is someone who's mastered more than one science. Okay, more than one science. And a guy is a mathematician, is also a scientist, etc., etc. He's polymath, and he's mastered many sciences. So he was the Grand Mufti of Tunisia in his time. Passed away 1393. He was also a historian as well. Okay, also a historian as well. So he makes a point. He says, this is Egypt. Okay. What does Allah call the king of Egypt usually in the Quran? Fir'aun. Yeah, Fir'aun. And Fir'aun is a laqab. It's a title. It's not an actual name of the man. It's referring to a specific era where they were kings of Egypt, and they were known as the Fir'auns, basically. So one of the Fir'auns is the guy who's part of the story of Yusuf, of Musa alayhi salam. Okay, but here Allah Jalla doesn't refer to him as a Fir'aun. He refers to him as what? Malik, king. He says this showing us a miracle in the Quran, for it is teaching us the era in which this story actually took place by referencing the king as being not a Fir'aun but actually being king. And he goes further, he says that this era is from the Muluk al-Qibt. Okay, I don't know how to translate that, to be honest, but the era, he said, is between 1525 and 1900 before Christ. Okay, and that's very interesting because they said Ibrahim alayhi salam came around 2000 years before Isa alayhi salam. Yeah, and we know that Ibrahim and then Ishaq, Yaqub and Yusuf, so it's very, very close. So he's saying this is like a miracle of the Quran, scientific miracle rather, or historical miracle, that not referring to the king of Egypt as Fir'aun but referring to him as a Malik, and Malik, that was era came before the era of the Fir'auns. So anyhow, the king now has a dream. And actually, let me read to you what Ibn Ashur said. He said, فالتعبير عنه بالملك في القرآن دون التعبير بفرعون مع أنه عبر عن ملك مصر في زمن موسى عليه السلام بلقب فرعون فهو من دقائق إعجاز القرآن العلمي. He said that expressing the king as being a king in the Quran here, as opposed to him being Fir'aun, when Fir'aun was the title of kings of a particular era, points to a very subtle scientific miracle in the Quran. Okay, that's what he said. Now, what does he say? This king says, Inni, indeed, Ara, I have seen 7 cows, baqarat. Siman means fat, strong, big fat cows, 7 of them. Ya'kuluhunna 7 ijaf. And I've seen them being devoured by 7 ijaf. Ijaf refers to a cow that is emaciated, very skinny, feeble looking cow. So just imagine that, you saw that in a dream. Fat cows being gobbled up by skinny cows. That's strange, isn't it? I mean, eating the cows is one thing already strange, but the ones who's eating is not the big ones eating the smaller ones, the smaller ones eating the big ones. Now that's going to make you confusing. What's that all about? That's what he saw. وَالسَّبَعَ سُنْبُلَاتٍ خُضْرٍ. And then I saw 7 green spikes. Sumbulat is a plural, is the envelope in which you find the grain wheat. They call it a spike. Long thing, it kind of shrouds over, and you have the spike, and you have the corn or the grain, whatever inside. I think 7 of those, green, meaning green, vibrant, ripe, fresh. 7 of those. وَأُخَرَ يَابِسَاتٍ. And then 7 that are withering away. So I was saying 7 fresh grains here, spikes, and 7 over here that are withered away. Now, anyone could have a wild guess at the interpretation of this dream? I think you have to be some serious person to be able to interpret that dream, right? Really confusing. I mean, the first one was, alright, I could get that one. The second one, pressing wine, yeah, maybe, could have got that one. This one, no, I'm not getting this one. This one is serious. Yeah, this one really confusing. So that's why he says, Ya ayyuhal mala'u. Al-mala' is referring to his senior people. So Ibn Ashur said that he calls his most senior ulama, his scholars from around Egypt, and he has an audience with them, tells them, this is my dream. And the thing is, Ibn Ashur says that the king realizes that this dream is not just about himself, it's about his whole nation. So he's worried. He's worried, and he knows it's not just about him, it's about the whole people of Egypt. And so he calls all of them and he says, listen, this is the dream. Now أفتوني في رؤياي. Now give me the fatwa of this ru'ya, of this dream. إن كنتم للرؤيا تعبرون. If you really do interpret dreams. You see, people that are close to the king, they're like, they suck up to the king, right? Whatever you say, king, we'll do anything. They're in Pakistan, subhanAllah, I remember there was this big culture clash when I went to Pakistan, and things they would say and do really get under my skin. One of the things they would do is, you ask anyone for anything, akhi, they say, ho jayega. It will happen, no worries, I can do it, no problem. It's fine, I'll do it. Move the mountain, no problem. Ho jayega. Everything, ho jayega, no problem. And they didn't do it. So I think to myself, why did they say that for? Why did they say they can do it when they can't? Everyone wants to be a Chaudhry Sahib, basically. Everyone wants to give it large, that yeah, we can do whatever we want to do. It's fine, no problem, nothing. There's a mushkila. So we must have been, we stopped on the way to Islamabad, they stopped at the service station. And I went there with my uncle, my dad, we sat down. The guy brought the menu said cappuccino, coffee, tea. I said, do you really do cappuccino? Bilkul karte hain. For sure. Tayyib. One cappuccino, one coffee. No problem, bhaiya. Comes back after 5 minutes. 2 cups. Look exactly the same. Taste exactly the same. One of them's cappuccino, apparently. What do you got, yaar? I think, man, that used to really tick me off. But this is the same thing. People under the king saying, can you interpret this? Yeah. What do you got? No problem. Tell us, we'll do it, no problem. So king tells the dream, like, yeah, no problem. So he says to them seriously, in kuntum lirru'ya ta'burun. If you really can interpret dreams. Now, don't mess me around, okay? So he's giving them proper order. He's already telling them that I know you waffle sometimes. Don't waffle with me on this one, okay? Seriously, interpret the dream. Okay. Now, what did they say? قالوا أضغاث أحلام. They all say the same thing. أضغاث أحلام. أضغاث, okay, is a plural of dirth. Dirth refers to a bunch of trees, twigs and leaves. Just mixed up bunch of, mixed up things, yeah. Adghath, many of those bundles of mixed up things. Ahlam. Ahlam, plural hulm. Hulm is also a type of dream. It's a type of dream that you see just because you've been thinking about that thing in the daytime. Sometimes you think about something a lot in the day. When you see a nice car, oh man, I wish I could have that car. Do you see the wheels in that car? In the night time, I'm driving the car. That's a hulm. Yeah, that's just it's not a real dream, basically. It's just your mind playing tricks on you because of what you've seen or thinking about in the daytime. So they say, these weird dreams, this is adghath wa ahlam. And the thing is, what they don't refer to as a dream, they refer to ahlam, which means they're not even sure it's one dream. They might think there's a number of dreams it's telling us. They haven't got a clue whatsoever. And these are the most knowledgeable people in Egypt at the time in interpreting dreams. They haven't got a clue. قالوا أضغاث أحلام وما نحن بتأويل الأحلام بعالمين. And we don't know the interpretation of ahlam. These things, we don't know the interpretation. Meaning, it doesn't have an interpretation. That's what they're trying to say. King, don't worry yourself. It doesn't even have a meaning. It's a pointless dream, okay? We don't know the ta'weel of these kind of things because there is no interpretation. That's what they're trying to say in a very nice way. Ajib, subhanallah. The only person in Egypt who can interpret that dream, Yusuf alayhi salam. Amazing, isn't it? And how the power of Allah Jalla wa'ala, and how He is control of every single thing, that no one in Egypt can interpret this dream, only Him. Quite amazing. So now let us go to this mas'ala. Very, very interesting mas'ala on tawakkul. The question is, did Yusuf alayhi salam show a lack of tawakkul when he said the words "Udhkurni 'inda rabbik," make mention of me to your master. According to some scholars, he did. Okay, he did. However, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has other ideas. Okay, so we'll read this together inshallah, and I'll try to explain as best as I can. And Allah says, وَقَالَ لِلَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ مِّنْهُمَ اذْكُرْنِي عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. He said to the one of them he knew was saved, please mention me when you are with your Lord. But Shaitan made him forget to remind his Lord, and so he stayed in prison for several years. Verse number 42. It is said that Shaitan caused Yusuf alayhi salam to forget the dhikr of his Rabb when he said, please mention me when you are with your Lord. But it is also said that rather the case is that Shaitan caused the prisoner to forget to relate the message onto his boss, and this is the correct meaning. This is due to the following reasons. Number one, it brings the two statements together in harmony comfortably. Number two, the pronoun goes back to the nearest person unless there is evidence to the contrary. فَأَنْسَاهُ. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah makes the case, first of all, these are the two opinions, okay? One side is saying that no, Shaitan didn't make the prisoner forget. It's actually talking about Yusuf alayhi salam. Okay? Made Yusuf alayhi salam forget Allah in that moment. And that showed a lack of tawakkul. Okay, that's the other opinion. And he said this is not the correct opinion. The other opinion is the correct opinion. He brings two proofs, first of all. They are both linguistic proofs. Look at the ayah. اذكرني عند ربك. Okay, فأنساه الشيطان ذكر ربي. He says that if you say فأنساه, this ha, known as the pronoun, the dhamir, it should go back to the closest thing mentioned. So what is mentioned first? Yusuf alayhi salam. He is قال للذي ظن أنه ناج. Yusuf alayhi salam says about this person. This person, make mention of me to your Rabb. فَأَنْسَاهُ. فَأَنْسَاهُ should go back to the one at the beginning or the one who came after? The closest person. Unless there is evidence to the contrary, meaning linguistically. This is a known principle, known maxim in Lugha. Okay, so from that perspective, it should go back to the ex-prisoner. And he said if it does, and we read it like that, the actual expression, this side and that side, both sides make sense, because it's like saying, okay, اذكرني عند ربك, make mention of me to your Lord, فأنساه الشيطان, but he forgot. Who forgot? What makes more sense to say who forgot here? The prisoner, isn't it? Because that's what we're talking about. So he's saying it makes sense. It brings both expressions into harmony. Yeah, that's what he's saying here. Let's continue. Therefore, Yusuf a.s. did not forget to make dhikr of his Rabb, but rather he was always in the remembrance of Allah. He has just finished off giving da'wah to the two prisoners about becoming Muslim and submitting themselves to Allah. He delayed telling them the interpretation in order to remind them of Allah first. He states in the very beginning of that conversation, ذَلِكُمَا مِمَّا عَلَّمَنِي رَبِّي, making mention from the outset about his Rabb. Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, okay, listen, look here. We just had a whole passage about Yusuf Islam giving some top quality da'wah to these two mushriks. And what is the da'wah? Remember Allah. Submit yourself to Allah. Leave this shirk behind. And then all of a sudden, فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانِ, he himself forgets about Allah. Does that make sense? He's just given some fantastic da'wah to these people about becoming Muslim, about Allah. Even the dream interpretation, the way he begins it off is not by saying that I know the dream interpretation. He says, ذَلِكُمَا مِمَّا عَلَّمَنِي رَبِّي. First of all, you asked me a question, Allah taught me the answer to this question. So Allah mentioned in the beginning. He remembered Allah in the very beginning. And then he gives them da'wah. And so all of a sudden, after all that, you're saying that he just forgot about Allah? Doesn't make sense. Yeah? Now, he states in the very beginning of that conversation, ذَلِكُمَا مِمَّا عَلَّمَنِي رَبِّي, making mention from the outset about his Rabb. After saying all of this, how could he then be duped by Shaitan into forgetting his Rabb? The more probable explanation is that Shaitan caused the ex-prisoner to forget. Those that go for the other view then say that it would have been better for Yusuf a.s. not to have said اذكرني عند ربك, but instead
place his trust in Allah, having tawakkul. Due to this momentary lapse in remembering his Lord, he ended up staying in prison for a few more years.
You can see why the other opinion is as it is. Because فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ is kind of confusing, isn't it? Like, why did he stay in prison for longer? And it sounds like a punishment, right? Does it or not? Kind of, it can be interpreted like that. It was interpreted like that. That he's done something wrong, فَلَبِثَ, and so he ends up languishing in prison for more years. What did he do wrong? اذكرني عند ربك. You shouldn't have said that. And that, they said, negates tawakkul, to say that, a statement like that. Now, to appreciate this, you have to understand what tawakkul means in the first place. Okay? I will start with the definition given by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, rahimahullah. A very, very good definition which Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, also chose to be, I think, his preferred definition of tawakkul as well. Ibn Rajab, okay, what does he say? He said the definition of tawakkul linguistically, by the way, just means reliance on something other than yourself. Okay, reliance on something other than yourself. There's another linguistic definition which is ajz, to think that you are incapable of doing something, rather something else is capable. And that's maybe a better linguistic definition. The Islamic definition, or what does the concept mean religiously? Ibn Rajab says, a true reliance of the heart in Allah in seeking a benefit or warding off a harm regarding all worldly affairs and the hereafter. So he's saying that, number one, it's to do with the heart. Okay? It's not to do with the tongue, not to do with the limbs. It's to do with the heart. The heart feels trust and reliance on Allah. For what? Well, because you want something in your life. You want something. You're relying on Allah to give you that thing. Or you're scared of something. I don't want to have a car crash. I don't want to lose my child. I don't want to fall ill. I'm relying on Allah that He will prevent me from this harm. Do you see? Whether that's regarding the dunyawi matters, the examples we've given, or the akhirah. I wish for hul ayn in paradise. What do you mean you wish? I'm relying on Allah that He will give it to me. Inshallah. So this is about the hereafter. Are we clear on the definition? Yeah, clear on the definition. I doubt that you are clear on the definition. Yeah, but anyhow, we'll carry on. So based on this definition, now we look at the statement that what Yusuf alayhi salam did was to negate tawakkul. Because what they're saying here is that he placed his reliance in the king for a what? According to the definition, for what? In order to seek a benefit. Yeah, which is what you said, justice. So he wants justice. And they're saying, by saying, make mention of me to your master, he was placing his trust in getting justice in the king and not Allah. Make sense so far? Okay, so that's where they're coming from when they said that. Now, let's carry on from now.
In response to this, it is said that there is no such indication that Yusuf a.s. showed a lack of tawakkul in this incident. Rather, he has just said, in al-hukmu illa lillah. His statement, اذكرني عند ربك, is much like Yaqub a.s. that comes later on when he says, وَقَالَ يَا بَنِيَّ لَا تَدْخُلُوا مِنْ بَابٍ وَاحِدٍ وَدْخُلُوا مِنْ أَبْوَابٍ مُتَفَرِّقَةٍ. And no one says that this statement shows a lack of tawakkul.
So 2 points here, and both amazing points. He says, look, Yusuf a.s. just said, in al-hukmu illa lillah. Allah commands and decides everything. And then all of a sudden he's going to forget and say, no, the king decides this matter. Doesn't make sense. Then he says, if you said this negates tawakkul, then what about what his father, Yaqub alayhi salam, will say later on? What does his father say to his sons? He says, son, you're going to go to Egypt now, search out your brother Binyamin and Yusuf alayhi salam. Well, I'll tell you what, when you go, enter in from many, many different doors. Don't go in from one gate. Egypt, It's got many gates you can enter from. If you all go in there together, then a number of things may happen. Number one, people are gonna see you, and this is a time where it's a recession, so it might be bandits around. You might get robbed. All of you together, all your luggage, all your good, your bida'a, all your merchandise on you, you might get robbed, or might get the evil eye. Yeah, all of you, 11 of you, sons, brothers, and you all, maybe they're all handsome as well, like their brother Yusuf alayhi salam, you might get the evil eye. So go in from different doors. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah says, if you're going to say this is negating tawakkul, then surely that's negating tawakkul as well, no? No? It's a fair point, but no one said that. No one said that. No.
Moreover, Allah has already taken testimony to the fact that Yusuf alayhi salam is from al-mukhlasin, and a real mukhlis cannot be considered as such if he places his tawakkul in other than Allah, as this entails a level of shirk. As for Yusuf alayhi salam, he was free from shirk from all angles, in terms of his ibadah of Allah as well as his tawakkul in Allah.
So here he said, look, another point now. Allah Jalla wa'ala already said before this, إِنَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا الْمُخْلَصِينَ. Allah, subhanallah, praised Yusuf alayhi salam in the most amazing way by saying, he is one of my slaves from those that are chosen, meaning those that are sincere. Truly sincere to Allah. Not half sincere, half not sincere. They are purely sincere for Allah's sake. That's like a title Allah has given you. This is Yusuf alayhi salam. Now, if you said that even in this moment he places tawakkul in other than Allah, then that negates him being a mukhlis. Because if he's a mukhlis, he's always thinking about Allah, doing things for Allah's sake and Allah's sake alone. And if once you say that he places tawakkul in the king for even a moment, what you're saying is that he did a type of shirk. Because the only one who has the right of our deepest feelings of trust is who? Who is it? Allah. Yeah? Only Allah. So if you momentarily place in someone other than Allah, you did a form of shirk. Now, is that possible for someone who's been graded as a mukhlis by Allah? It can't be possible. He's a mukhlis, means that's it, that's who he is. That's just who he is. Yeah? And then to say that he did something to negate tawakkul, that contradicts this, because it means for a moment he wasn't a mukhlis. In fact, he done something quite bad. Okay, let's carry on.
He chose to place his trust in Allah during the temptation trial, saying internally to himself, وَإِلَّا تَصْرِفْ عَنِّي كَيْدَهُنَّ أَصْبُ إِلَيْهِنَّ. How could he then place his trust in other than Allah when speaking aloud to people around him?
This is a very subtle point. You know when the wife of Aziz tried to seduce him, and then she got her friends involved as well, they put pressure on him as well, really tried to force him to وَالْعِيَاذُ وَدُو zina with them. In that moment, Yusuf alayhi salam, he cried out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, وَإِلَّا تَصْرِفْ عَنِّي كَيْدَهُنَّ أَصْبُ إِلَيْهِنَّ. If you don't turn me away from them, أَصْبُ إِلَيْهِنَّ, I'll end up just being inclined towards them. I can't trust myself. I can't trust myself. So if, when you talk to yourself, okay, you're a bit more liberal in the way you talk than the way you speak when you're in front of people, right? And if people have dodgy thoughts, right? But they don't share those dirty thoughts with other people, right? So the opposite is usually true. Yeah, you have dodgy thoughts, but you control yourself when you're in front of other people. Yeah, you kind of, I can't say that out loud. That's just wrong. So, bil acts here that Yusuf alayhi salam said internally to himself, Allah, I can't even trust myself. I need to trust you. And now you're saying he trusted someone other than himself when he can't even trust his own self. Would he do that? And the other thing is, would he say something like this when he thinks like this? You see, it's a very subtle point. And it usually is the other way around. If you think certain things, you say them. Yeah. But if you don't say things that you don't think. Does that make sense? So it's a very subtle point, subhanAllah. But he's saying, look, he said, back then when he was in trouble, he said, trust myself. This is how I feel about myself. Then later on he's saying, let me trust the king. Nah. And look at the analysis, ajib. Ajib. And subhanAllah, my Shaykh also said that if you look at the tarjihat of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, what does it mean by tarjihat? It means people criticize Ibn Taymiyyah a great deal. They say that he went against ijma' in many of his opinions. And they say that, and you look at his opinions, he goes against so many of the scholars in what he says, and he's very harsh in his criticism. But he said if you analyze all of his tarjihat, all of his views, those views, and analyze them, you find that one of the factors that made Ibn Taymiyyah say this is the correct opinion is ta'zeem al-sharia, to magnify the sharia of Allah and to magnify the prophets of Allah. And what is making him decide this view is better than this one? Well, the principle in my mind is that the prophets of Allah need to be spoken about in the best possible way. That's the guiding light here. And everything else is following behind that. In this view, other views you find there any, if you analyze the tarjihat of Ibn Taymiyyah, this is what you find. This is the same thing here. You could have said this or this, but he's a prophet of Allah. Should you really go for this other opinion when it doesn't seem to be likely? And that is why he's aggressive. That is why very critical as well.
Later on, Yusuf a.s. will actually ask the king, اجعلني على خزائن الأرض, but asking support in order to bring about a religious benefit to others, not necessarily to detract from a person's tawakkul, as neither is seeking the leadership position prohibited on him. How then can we say that his request to the prisoner, اذكرني عند ربك, negates tawakkul? All that Yusuf a.s. did was to ask this person to inform the king of his plight in order for justice to be served. Yusuf a.s. was the toughest of all people.
So here Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah says, okay, again, let's look at what else has been said. Later on, Yusuf a.s. actually gets free from prison. King calls him and says, wherever you want, it's yours. What did he say to him? اجعلني على خزائن الأرض. Make me the state treasurer. I want that job there. The job of the Aziz. That's what I want. Yeah, that's number 2 in Egypt, just under the king. So he asks him for something. He asks him for something. Anyone say that negates tawakkul? And he actually asks him for something for himself. Yeah. In this case, he's just saying, "Udhkurni 'inda rabbik." He's asking that justice be served. Do you see the difference? Now, one side he's saying, can I have this please? The other side is saying, can you hear my case? I just want the case to be heard. I just want justice to be served. If this isn't negating tawakkul, how can this be negating tawakkul? Yeah. So he explains, how do we understand this? He says that all that Yusuf a.s. did was to ask this person to inform the king of his plight in order for justice to be served. And Yusuf a.s. was the toughest of all people, meaning his character wouldn't even allow him to place his trust in other than Allah. He was a very, very strong person. Interesting thing in the middle is a discussion about leadership, because he's asking for a position. And what we know is that you're not supposed to be chasing after positions in dunya. Yeah, this is something which is madhmoom, blameworthy in our sharia. So how do we understand this? Ibn Taymiyyah will explain a lot more later on. He mentions a point here, which is that he's seeking the position not for the position. He's seeking it because he wants to bring khair to the people of Egypt and to give da'wah to them as well. And that's a very, very strong point, because Yusuf a.s. interprets the dream. What's the dream about? What is the dream about? The king's dream. It's about people of Egypt. You're going to be suffering big time. In 7 years' time, things are not going to be good. Recession is going to hit. In the interpretation of the dream, Yusuf a.s. is taught how to deal with the recession. He's taught how to devise a strategy to lift them out of the recession. So is he the most qualified person in the whole of Egypt? Yes, he is. So when he says, make me the state treasurer, he is saying that based on evidence. Number 2, based on a righteous intention. And number 3, not chasing after the position, the badge of Aziz. Alhamdulillah, I got the badge of Aziz. Everybody, can you see? I'm Aziz Sahib now, okay? Don't call me that, I'm Aziz now, okay? No, he's not doing it for that reason. He's doing it for the khair inside the position, and we'll speak about this more inshallah when it comes to the ayah.
Another notable point is that when the king eventually finds out about Yusuf alayhi salam and summons for him to be liberated from prison, he refuses and instead says, ارجع إلى ربك فاسأله ما بال النسوة اللاتي قطعن أيديهن إن ربي بكيدهن عليم. Go back to your master and inquire of him what happened about the women who cut their hands. My Lord has knowledge of their cunning guile. He remembered his Lord in such a state just as he did back then when making the initial request.
Now, so at this point he makes another point. He says that, okay, so you people are saying that he was really eager to get out of prison, yeah? So when eventually the king does find out about him and says to someone, go and get him out of prison, okay? That's enough for him now. What did he say to that person? ارجع إلى ربك فاسأله ما بال النسوة التي قطعن أيديهن. He says to that guy, I'm not going to get out of prison just like that. No, I'm not going anywhere. You go back to the king and ask him to investigate what happened to those women that cut their hands. I'm not here just to get out of prison. I want justice to be served. You've been in prison for so long, one chance comes along, king says, that's enough, come out. No, I'm not coming out. I'm not coming out because I don't want people to think, oh, he just wanted to get out of prison. I don't want it for myself. I want the haqq to become known. Okay, so tell him to go back, go to the king and say, you know those women, they cut their hands? Do an investigation. Okay, justice needs to be served. Even that shows that he wasn't in it for himself. He wasn't showing a lack of tawakkul at any stage. And even in the end of this verse, he says, Inna Rabbi bikaydihinna alim. Indeed, my master, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is very knowledgeable, fully aware of their plotting. So he says that he never forgot Allah in such an amazing situation where he's just been told, you're a free man. He doesn't even forget Allah in that situation. When you get really excited sometimes, Eid day, what happens on Eid day? Everyone forgets about Allah. That's what happens to me when you get excited. So he's saying, in this hal, where he's super excited now, he's been told, that's it, no more, you're going to get out, he remembers Allah. So if he doesn't forget Allah in this situation, how could he forget Allah in that situation? It's amazing analysis, Allah, it's amazing.
He ended up staying in that prison for bid'a sinin, not out of punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having left a wajib or doing something haram, but because that is what the people had already decided when they imprisoned him.
Okay, so how do we explain the last part of the verse, فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجِنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ? How do we explain then that? Okay, so the ex-prisoner, you're saying, forgot to make mention of Yusuf alayhi salam to the king. Okay. And so Yusuf alayhi salam spent another 7 odd years in prison. Yeah, meaning that is what Allah had decreed for him, to spend those years in prison. He wanted to, or there was an attempt to get out earlier, but it failed, and he ended up staying for the term that I had already decreed for him, which was to see the full term out. And that full term did something for Yusuf alayhi salam. Number one, it set him up in order to interpret the king's dream later on, which will get him out. And secondly, the whole tarbiyah process in prison, living there for so many years, it changes a person. It toughens a person up and gives someone some skills that they can use in their life later on. We've spoken about this before, inshallah, so we're not going to it now. Now, so his interpretation is فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجِنِ, means so he ended up staying in prison for the time that he was supposed to in the first place. Meaning what was already intended by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not as a punishment, but because this is what Allah wanted.
The conclusion is that Yusuf alayhi salam committed no such sin which is being mentioned by Allah. When Allah mentions the sinning of any prophets, alayhimus salam, He always makes mention of their istighfar alongside it. Here we find no such mention of istighfar coming from Yusuf alayhi salam, just like none was mentioned regarding his hum towards the wife of Aziz.
Another fantastic, amazing point that Ibn Taymiyyah makes, he says, okay, look in the Quran. So he's saying he made a mistake. Now this is not just a mistake. It's actually a big mistake to do something like that. You agree or not? Place your tawakkul in other than Allah. Having tawakkul is wajib firstly. and placing it in someone other than Allah, there's a level of shirk even there. Okay, so the prophets can make mistakes. However, when Allah tells us about their mistake, what we find is that Allah tells us about their istighfar. Case number one, Adam alayhi salam. Yeah, he made a mistake. فَعَصَى آدَمَ رَبَّهُ غَوَى. Yeah, Adam alayhi salam, he did something which was an act of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا وَإِن لَمْ تَغْفِرْ لَنَا وَتَرْحَمْنَا لَنَكُونَ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Clear-cut mention of his repentance. Another prophet, who knows another prophet that made a mistake and then he, yes?
Jonah.
Who?
Jonah.
Yunus alayhi salam, yes. So what did he do? What was his mistake? He left the people. He should have continued doing da'wah to the people, he left the people, okay? Okay, swallowed up by the whale, then he makes a dua to Allah. What did he say in that dua? La ilaha illa ant subhanak inni kuntu min al-zalimin. He says clearly, I indeed was of those that did wrong. Clear mention of repentance. Another prophet. Who else do you know in the Quran where he made a mistake and Allah mentioned that mistake and then straight away Allah mentioned his istighfar? Who? Nuh alayhi salam? Yes. That he asked for Allah about his son. Yeah, okay, but that's okay. No problem. That's true as well. There's something more clear than that, though. Other cases more clear. Sorry? Yeah, Musa. Is that what you're going to say as well? Yeah, Musa alayhi salam. So, فَوَكَزَ مُوسَى فَقَضَى عَلَيْهِ. Musa alayhi salam struck this man a blow. فَقَضَى عَلَيْهِ. And what do you know? The guy fell over and died straight away. Subhanallah. And accidental murder. Okay, accidental killing. Mistake made by Musa alayhi salam. And he says clearly in Surah Qasas that indeed I made a mistake, فَغَفَرَ لَهُ. And Allah says, I forgave him. I forgave him. Meaning he made a mistake, made tawbah. Okay, so what you're saying in the Quran, every single time without exception, a prophet's mistake is mentioned, then the istighfar is mentioned alongside it. Okay, so what about here? Any mention of istighfar from Yusuf alayhi salam? Nothing at all. So if no istighfar is mentioned, it means that he never made a mistake in the first place. Ajib analysis. Ajib analysis. So he said again, subhanallah, go back in the story, Allah Jalla wa says, وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا. And she had hum for him and he had hum for her. Hum meaning desire. No, he didn't have desire. We mentioned this before, long discussion again. He didn't have a desire. Oh no, he had bad desire and he acted upon it. No, both of these interpretations are wrong. He did have desire, he never acted upon it. He never did anything wrong. It was natural. That's why no istighfar was mentioned. I don't know if you remember that from before. Same point here. Never made no mistake, no istighfar. Okay, so that is the conclusion that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah comes to, that he made no such mistake whatsoever, never showed a lack in tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was of the toughest of all people, alayhi salam. And that brings us to the end of this dars. Subhanakallahumma wa hamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.